Hello and welcome to the HLS RTMP streaming tutorial that you can use to stream on GMod cinema servers. There used to be a former mod for our server that created some helpful guides that I'll be using today, and you can just find it on their website here. And it'll be this tutorial here, which I've already preloaded right here. Now it is a little bit outdated, but I will try to show the important changes to help you avoid having a difficult time setting this up. But I will be trying to follow it as close as I can and explaining everything along the way. So here this kind of just explains how it generally works. So you will likely be using OBS or an equivalent, which is like a screen recording service, which you can use to either record your screen or just include some like video files and send them over to your server. So the numbers here are called protocols, and they're each different thing you're going to be using is associated with a specific protocol number. So 1935 is associated with RTMP, and we will be setting that up in some files later that I'll show you. Generally not too important, but do watch out for the numbers. It does recommend to use a specific Ubuntu version, but I found that it really doesn't matter which one you use. Just try to use one of the latest ones that are usually kept up to date, which will keep things more secure and functioning. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to choose a VPS. You don't need a VPS to run the streaming, but it is recommended just because it makes it easier for others to access the server in specific locations and just avoids lag and gives you just enough like dedicated performance for the streaming instead of just using your own computer. So that's why it's recommended. And there is a fee associated, but I'll try to show you the cheapest way that you can set up the server, and it's really not going to cost you all that much if you're trying to do it the way I'm showing you here. Two of the recommended options are the DigitalOcean and Vultr, and we found in comparing them that they're pretty similar in cost, but Vultr slightly edges out because you can get, for the lowest price of like $6 per month estimated, you'll get an NVMe SSD disk, which is a lot faster than a regular SSD, and that will allow you to load up files a lot faster and avoid lag. And this is just a generally better streaming experience. And if you really are just tight on the money and you really just want like maybe to save a couple bucks, then you can go with DigitalOcean. It'll be like at minimum $4 at this time at least. And either way, you're good to go, whichever one you pick. I just personally recommend Vultr. And I'll be showing you how to set it up, but we're just going to be following this. Now you're going to need to set up a DNS after you create the server. And I'll just explain to you what that is. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is just set up the server. When you load up the site like Vultr, you're going to have this option up here where you can click deploy new server. Pretty simple. And it's going to give you a bunch of options. Now, if you use a dedicated, it's going to cost you a lot more, and it's really overkill for this type of setup. So generally, we're going to want to use like a shared CPU, and in most cases, you're not really going to notice any performance issues. And Vultr will give you a lot of different server locations. You can just choose whatever is most closest to you, and that's what I recommend, just to keep the lag or the delay of your stream as low as possible from where you're located. So if you're located, let's say in like the Midwest in the United States, then you're going to want to pick something like Chicago because it's kind of based on the time zone as well. That would be like the closest server in the Midwest region. And then you're going to have to choose what's called an image, and it gives you a lot of different options. Now, all of these technically can work, especially if they're Linux focused. It will be compatible with the guide. but it's recommended just to use Ubuntu to keep things simpler and just easier to configure. I'll go ahead and just use the recommended version, even though you could just use one of the newer ones and you'll probably be fine. But just to be safe, you can just pick the most stable version and the longest supported, which is the 20.04. Try to use the 64-bit version. And then once you do that, you'll be able to back up or save a snapshot. Now, I don't really recommend the backup for this type of server unless you have like a lot of different data on the same server. But if you're just going to be using just this alone, you're better off just maybe making a snapshot. And what that will do is whenever you want to create one, it'll just save it right here and you'll be able to select it. And then you'll be able to choose whatever type of changes you want here. Let's say you want like a little bit extra storage or a little bit extra performance on it if needed. And you'll be able to choose that option here. And when you load this, it'll take like maybe 5 minutes. And you'll just have the server load up after 5 minutes and really save a lot of time. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, there's a few different reasons. One, if something happens and your server crashes or gets, the physical system gets deleted and they never had a backup of it, well, having a snapshot will basically keep a backup in their, their cloud storage system. So even if one physical computer gets shut down and deleted, you'll have this saved up and you can launch it and it'll save you a lot of headache trying to get it set up again. But the second reason why we do that is you don't really want to keep the server running all the time, especially if you're not using it constantly. If you're just going to be streaming for like maybe an hour or two or just a few hours, then you can just, shut down the server, delete it at the end, and then whenever you want to set it up again, you'll come back here and pick snapshot and just load everything back up from here. It's going to be all automated for you, and you're going to have to do very minimal changes to get everything working again. But for now, just to show you how to set it up the first time, we're just going to continue from here. So I'm just going to, you can pick whatever you want here. It's all in preference. Some believe that Intel is a little bit more stable when you're running it on a server. But I found that regardless of what you use, you're going to probably get a very similar experience. You really don't need much here. One virtual CPU, I find, is pretty much enough. You don't need that much memory or that much storage, really. The higher the bandwidth you get, the better. But even if I've been streaming like for days or weeks, I've really never been able to hit this limit. I barely even reach 1% in a single month in most cases. But monitor your usage and it'll show you graphs of that and you'll be able to figure out what kind of needs you need here. But I just recommend going with this option when you're starting. So yeah, backup's really not needed unless you're have a lot of secure data that you don't want to lose. So I don't really recommend that. You get the snapshot for free, and not really free, but when you do make one, it'll charge you like 5 cents after like a month. So really, really cheap, and I find it's worth it. And if you don't want to use a snapshot, I'll show you how to save some of your files just to make sure you don't have to really do any of this as long as it takes in the beginning again. You don't really need anything else here. I don't really recommend using the IPv6. It just keeps it a lot simpler when you just stick to the IPv4, but in the future that might change. But for now, this will work just fine. Then here you'll have an option to set up your SSH. What that means is it increases the security to log into your streaming server. So instead of just having to come back to this website to log in, you can just open up a console on your computer. You'll be able to use a program like PuTTY, so I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is an example of PuTTY, and then you'll have an example of, this is just a session that I saved here, so this is the website name that I use, and instead of the IP address, I just use the domain name. This is just the SSH port that you're generally going to use. You're going to pick the selection as SSH and the connection type. Once you configure things, you can save it. Just don't forget to come here and check your settings here, check that you've saved there's a bunch of different articles you can find online on how to make these, and just as an example, you can come to Vulture's site and it'll show you how to set it up with them. I'll just go ahead and skip it because you can pretty much set this up on your own once you figure it out. But it is optional, you don't really need to have the SSH, you can just come back here and log in. At the bottom here, you're just gonna choose a name, doesn't really matter what you choose, but as just an example, I'll call it example streaming server. I'm gonna hit deploy, and there you go. It's gonna start installing it, and once it's ready, you're just gonna go ahead, come back here, click on it, and then I'll show you how to continue once it's ready. Okay, welcome back. So the server got finished installing. It didn't take more than maybe like 30 seconds at most. You'll see I have like a pending charge here, but it, depending on whatever you selected, it's just going to charge you about $0.01 for every hour of usage. I mean, not too bad really. If you try to minimize how long you're using it, you probably won't see more than $1 charge every month or so. But then you'll get this this IP here. You're gonna want to try to copy that, and this is the next important part. So before we even begin logging in, what you're gonna do is you're gonna copy your IP, and then you're going to find a DNS service. So what the tutorial recommended is actually to use the duck DNS, which you certainly can. And you just kind of come here and you know, you just create whatever name you want. You can call it example server, and then this is going to be the link that you're going to use to access your website. And then once you actually create it, anyway, once you actually create it, so I'm just going to use example streaming server 1 and try to add that in, and there you go. Now it will give you an option to use the IPv6 if you want, but we're really only going to use the IPv4, which is the IP that we copied before. So I'm going to come here and paste it, and then update the IP. Okay, so then after you update your server's IP here, and you've chosen your domain name, all you're going to do is you're going to, once your server is actually set up, you're going to have your URL something like this. It's going to look like your domain name, .duckdns.org as an example, and that's how you're going to access your website, and that's the links that you're going to use. Instead of just always using the IP, it's just a lot easier to remember the link like this. So as an example, you can come up here and see that this website has a certificate. So when you see this connection is secure, you can pull that up, and then there's a certificate valid link here. When you pull that up, it's going to show you information about the certificate that they're using. Now, if you don't know what a certificate is, you can always look that up as well. But basically, it's a security measure that's enforced by browsers like Chrome and other browsers that you're going to want to be streaming this to. Now, for example, in the GMod Cinema, it does use Chromium, and Chromium enforces this certificate validation system. When I tried to use DuckDNS, I wasn't able to create a certificate because DuckDNS, for whatever reason, just wasn't updating certain information and wasn't being accessible to the certificate authority, which is like the website you're connecting to make the certificate. But what ended up working for me was actually just going ahead and using Cloudflare. And then I went ahead and just showed you an example of how my Cloudflare is set up. And one of the reasons that I recommend using Cloudflare is really because it's one of the most popular DNS services out there. Pretty much every major business is using Cloudflare. It's not only is it really secure, but it's very quick and easy to use. Whenever you make changes to it, it's pretty much always going to update right away, and you'll be able to access your whatever website you're loading when you make those changes. And you're probably going to be making changes every single time that you delete and boot up a new server. So just taking a look here, you're just going to go to Cloudflare, you're going to try to create, and probably you're going to have to pay for a domain name. You can experiment and look up different names and see what prices they offer. I don't recommend paying more than like $10 a year. You can even find some as low as like $5. I've not really seen anything below $5, but just try your best to experiment and pick out whatever name you would like to use. And after you've created one, you can go back and find the DNS tab here. And I'll just quickly explain what we're setting up here. So what I have down here, this is like a table that the certificates are going to be using in order to validate your server and create that secure file for you. The first thing you're going to do is create what's called an A record. So you're going to select A. And this is meant for the IPv4 address that we're using, which is something like this. So that should look familiar to you. You're just going to come here, put in the name of your website that you selected for your domain. And then you're going to paste the IP of your server. And this is the only thing you're really going to be modifying in most cases when you're deploying that server. Then down here, it's going to give you the proxy status. Now, Cloudflare has a feature that will hide your public IP address from those that are trying to access your website, and it's a strong security measure. However, when you're trying to stream from the server, like let's say you're using the OBS and you're trying to stream to the server from that, using this feature will actually prevent the stream from working. So we actually do have to disable that as far as I'm aware. You'll just have this grayed out and just select DNS only, and you'll find that this will help fix the issue. Just maybe to explain and help you understand, when it hides the IP, the stream has a tough time finding the server. It needs to know the IP in order to actually access some of the features that we're going to be using from the server. And even though it is a secure feature, it's not really going to matter too much for our purposes because we're not doing much other than just sharing like a stream. If you need really strong security for whatever reason and you don't want to stream publicly, you may want to find other paths to make it more secure, but I find that you're really only going to make this work if you're using if you're just exposing the IP here. And the last thing that it shows you here is the TTL, which stands for time to live. You can set it as just auto or specify it yourself, but all that does is it specifies the speed at which you want to update these records. And I find that auto just does it right away, so you're not really going to run into issues in those cases. The only other things that you need to look at here are the CNAME. This is optional. It's just you can specify something like www, which just goes in front of your domain, and that just keeps it so that if someone's typing in www, they can just still access your website according to what you had here and just redirects it. It's just an optional thing you may want to use, but it's not really necessary for our purposes. But what is necessary is right here. You'll need to create a TXT record, and you'll be, when you're later on setting up the server, it is going to prompt you for this thing called the Acme challenge. So Acme is a certificate authority that we're going to be using, and this is one method that they will use to validate your certificate. So they will give you a specific long string of characters that you're going to paste into here, which I've censored out. And it's always just going to be the exposed DNS only. There's no proxy here. It's going to use that and validate it one time and create the certificate. And this way, when you go to your website like I have here on mine, you'll get that secure banner up here. And then you can see that your certificate's been encrypted and authorized and all that. Okay, so we're back to the server. Gonna go ahead and just click here. Okay, so we're back to the streaming server. I just went ahead and opened it up. You can just kind of come here and just select the title here, and you'll be able to open up your overview page here. You can already see that as I'm actually streaming, it is currently using some usage, but it's not very high, so you can kind of see how much you're going to expect to be running like the operating system and the streaming. So it's going to fluctuate somewhere between here. Not much bandwidth being used, obviously, but you can monitor it here. Now they're going to generate a default password that you're going to use to log in to the terminal, which is right up here. Okay, so I just went up here and clicked View Console, and then I'm able to see my server now. Alright, so it's probably me to log in. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and just copy my password. Just paste that there. You're going to be given a default root password here. There are ways you can change that later. Just look that up. It's just too long to show in the video here, but really you're just going to need to copy whatever they give you here. In most cases it's going to work. So I do recommend using something like the PuTTY in order to access it and make it easier to access the server, but you can just use the console here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just enter the default username, which is, you're really going to be wanting to be using root. And you're going to go ahead and paste that password in. Now the only way I found that this works on the console is if I just kind of come here, go on the clipboard, paste it out here. Make sure there's no extra spaces because that can affect the password. It's going to paste it in for you here. You're just not going to be able to see it. Going to close that back. You're just going to press enter, and it's going to log you right in. And then here's where we're just going to begin and set some of this stuff up here. Okay, so hopefully you can see back here. I've got my console here, and I'm just going to be showing you side by side what we're going to be doing. So we're going to go back in the tutorial. Something to note here is that there's a PHP version 7.4. Now this is apparently the last stable version of PHP when the Ubuntu 20.04 released. If you're using a newer version of Ubuntu, you may be able to use a newer version of PHP, such as 8.3 as of this time. You can modify this and try to install 8.3. And I was able to do this, but on 20.0.4, unless you do some other changes to your repository list, which you can find online if you really want to, you're just going to have to stick with the 7.4, and everything will work just about the same, so it really doesn't matter which one you use. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy the code here, paste it in my little clipboard right here, close down that clipboard. Once that's all done, you're going to hit enter, and you're just going to wait until all this is done. I'm going to be back once it's 100%. And I did run this before, so I'm getting this message here, but when you run it, you should be able to see that Apache 2 is installed, as well as all the other packages here. So once that's done, we are going to get the latest version of nginx, or it's actually nginx on your VPS here. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is copy this command, and the current version of nginx at the time this was made was 1.19.9. There is actually a newer version of nginx that I'm going to show you, and you're probably going to want to use that as Chromium is getting updated. You're going to be wanting to use the latest nginx as well in most cases. So when you click on this link here, it'll take you to the nginx download page, and you can see the oldest version, and then when you scroll all the way down, they'll show you the latest version here. Okay, and if you scroll all the way down, somewhere when you end up right here, just pay attention to the dates here. But it says right here, October 2024. As of this time, this is the latest version of nginx, and it's 1.27.2. And we're just going to actually not copy the zip, but the tar.gz is the one that we're going to be using for the Ubuntu here to extract. So I'm going to copy that, I copy the link address. So back to the tutorial, it says to use the command wget, which is basically just going to download the file. So we're going to type wget, we're going to go back, and depending on if you're using this, you're still going to be using the clipboard, paste in your URL, make sure there's no extra spaces just to be safe. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter. Now it's going to go ahead and download that. It should not take too long. If you notice it taking a long time, probably just going to want to reboot the server and try this again. But basically, once it's done and you have the exact file name here, you're going to go down here and you're going to use the following command. Now you're going to have to modify this depending on the version of nginx that you downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and just type it out for you here. It's going to be tar -xf nginx dash, I'm going to be using 1.27.2.tar.gz. Gonna hit enter. And then another thing you want to pay attention to is, are you in the correct location for it? So if you don't know much about Linux, whenever you execute these commands, it matters whether you're in a specific directory. And this will usually tell you, like right now I'm in the root username, and it's pretty safe to just use it here, but just be mindful of where you're doing this as you're using the Linux system. So what that did is that took the place where it downloaded the file and it extracted it. And so to access it, we're going to be using the cd to access a directory, and we're going to point it to the same name, nginx-1.27.2. Make sure that you don't accidentally type in the tar.gz 2 times in a row, because we're only going to be getting the beginning part of the file name. Alright, now once we're here, the next thing we're going to execute is pretty simple. We're just going to copy that command. I'm actually just going to type it out for you here. So what that did is it created another folder in that directory called modules. And now we're going to go ahead and navigate to the modules folder. And you should see that right before that number sign here, you're using the directory /nginx, whatever the version, /modules, and that shows that we're in the correct directory. And we're going to just pretty much copy the exact URL right here. Now, hopefully this remains the same at the time that you see the tutorial, but it is possible that this might go down. But for now, we're going to just be using that command here. So this time I'm actually just going to go ahead and paste that. And that's done. And the next thing we're going to do is just type in cd space ... and it's going to bring us back to the beginning of the folder that we extracted out of the modules folder. Now here we're going to copy this command, and if you recognize some of this, this is actually what we saw at the very start of the tutorial when we had to download some of these plugins. And now we're just going to be installing those plugins to this folder right here. And do be mindful of which PHP version you are using here. And that's done. And you're going to copy and paste that, and then you're going to press enter. What that's going to do is it's just going to set some configurations, and once you've done that, you're now going to copy this command, and it's actually going to perform that configuration. Okay, now right after you finish running that command and it's all done, here it's just going to be a lot smoother out here, so you're just going to line by line copy these commands here. You're only going to need to do this one time, so just be careful if you make a mistake. Alright, and then once you ran through all these commands, finally we're just going to come down here. So we're going to need to navigate to this directory. Okay, so we're just going to copy that and paste it in here. And then we're just gonna copy and paste that. Now after you first ran through the enable command here, you should get this created symlink, and that will tell you that it was done correctly and that you've done all the steps so far pretty well. And then finally we can verify if our nginx is stable. So we're gonna run the nginx/t, and it should say that the syntax is okay and that the configuration is successful. Now you'll notice here there's a directory etc/nginx.conf, and this is going to be our active configuration file that we will be using to modify the settings for the screen. Very important, probably the most important thing that you'll be looking at and changing after this point. You will want to back up that file just in case you ever need to set up your server again, as it's going to contain a lot of pretty specific information you're not going to want to forget. So just make sure that when you get into your files here from the FTP I have up here, which you can use FileZilla to access, you'll just go into the root folder, go to etc nginx, and then you're going to find it right here. Now you can actually go here and just right click it and view edit and load up something like a Notepad or Notepad++, and you'll be able to just modify that, save it, and put it right back here. It's going to save you some time instead of just going in through the console to edit it like we're going to do here. So I prefer to just go through here and edit it that way. But you're going to want to make sure that you just copy that and just paste that somewhere here where it'll be safe and you'll be able to put it back in the future if needed. And then you're going to see that right here, the next command is we're going to be fetching the configuration file from the same tutorial server that we're using here, and we're going to be replacing that file with some configurations, which we are still going to modify. Now this next command that says vim is going to allow us to directly edit the file here. But you can just go straight into here and get right into that directory up here, and then just load up the file with a right click, view, edit, and put it into Notepad++. And there you go. Now we can just directly edit everything right here, and we can just save it when we're done, and it will be saved right back into the files without having to manually edit everything here. But just to show you, you can still just load up vim. You can just enter the command. You'll be able to read the exact same file all the way through. And then you can type whatever changes you would like. Now it does tell you here that to edit it, you're going to press I for the insert mode, and you can escape it by typing the colon W to save it, or W quit to save and quit. I usually just do the save and quit to escape that. While this configuration used to work pretty well, there were some changes in Chromium that have made this kind of obsolete and no longer work with the new security features that were implemented into Chromium. And one of the examples of that is right here. So there's these access control headers. You have to make sure that you're specifying very specific headers compatible with Chromium at this current time, and you can always try to research those, but I will go ahead and paste in the specific ones that you need, and I'll try to put that into the description so that you can put it into your configuration. Okay, so I just went ahead and replaced this little section here with the access control headers that are now acceptable. But if you use the prior ones, you may have some difficulty trying to get the stream to work. Okay, so the first thing we're going to actually look at here is in the RTMP configuration. So we're going to be using the 1935 port, and then we have these options here. Now, what you want to do is you want to remove this symbol, the number. What that does is it comments out a line, and that will prevent the configuration from executing that line as like a script or a code. So it'll just ignore it basically. But you actually want it to run this line here. So what that will do is it will be allowing you to stream from a specific IP or a list of IPs that you set here. So right here after allow, make sure that you're setting this as the same public IP address as the PC where you're streaming OBS from. It's not your server IP, which you can find if you go to the ifconfig.me. Now this right here, you can also comment that out, and it's optional, and it's just another way of limiting how many streams can be set if you don't want to specify all this IP information, but it's really unnecessary, and that's why it's optional. It doesn't really do that much for you. This should be sufficient. Now the next important section here is right here, you can change the chunk size, which you can basically either multiply it by 2 or divide it by 2, and that just changes the buffer size. Default seems to be good for most situations, but just depending on whatever situation you have with your server, sometimes doubling it or shrinking it down can help to stabilize a stream, either to improve quality or reduce buffering or whatever you're really aiming for. So just experiment with different chunk sizes. That will work for you, but I'm going to stick with the default for now. Now these are also optional here. I generally recommend to keep these on for the live stream. Okay, so one thing you might want to do before we finish saving this here is modify this section right here. Now you have a fragment and you have a playlist link. So the fragment is going to create about whatever amount of time in seconds you specify here. You don't even need the S, you can remove it. But either way, it will correctly save it if you do use the S here. What's important is that you experiment and try to find the best value that will keep your stream running as smooth as it possibly can. You do want to keep this value generally lower, as it will help during live streaming. Whenever someone loads the page or refreshes the page, it will help to sync the stream across for every viewer. If you change this and make it too high, what that may do is it will load the fragment at a certain part of it that may be like 10 seconds long, and so whoever's viewing it will be 10 seconds or so behind everyone else when watching the stream. For whatever reason you're having a difficult time streaming from OBS and you're seeing any drop frames or something like that, then modifying this and making it a little bit higher can make the stream a little bit smoother and not buffer as much, even if it causes some delay for the viewers. So just experiment and figure out what works best for you. So what this is what I mentioned earlier about the whole security system. So you're going to need to generate certificates, and then you're going to need to replace this information with the location of the certificates in your local server. So it's usually going to be somewhere right here where you're going to be replacing that with basically the name of the server that you set in your VPS. And that's what it's going to be named here. It's not the domain necessarily, but it is going to be the name that was set, and you can always go back and search your folders out here and try to figure out what that is. So if I go to my root folder, and I should have a folder here that says acme, and it will show you the same structure here. If you do use acme to certify, you'll probably get the same 3 files, and all you'll need to modify is just the names here in order to keep this structure pretty much intact. Now the trusted certificate here I believe is an optional one, but it just keeps things more secure when they're used in conjunction with the Acme certification here. But generally you're going to be using the certificate key and the certificate, which generally is going to have something like a CER, or if you're using something like Cloudflare, it might be a PEM, but you do want to use a public certified certification authority, or like a CA, in order to get these files. If you try to use the private, you're not going to get that HTTPS at the URL which you're looking for to make this work here. So in order to get that HTTPS, you probably will need to use the public certificate authority like Acme. Now I do want to show you, just to make this easier, you can take and copy this right here and then replace it with your domain right here. So what that will do is just replace the pathing all across the configuration whenever this thing occurs, and that will quickly help you fix and correct the configuration. Okay, and then what we can do now is just go ahead and save it. But I do want to mention here that while you can use port 8080 to stream, the GMod cinema system using Chromium no longer seems to support port 8080 because it is insecure. But pretty much you can just comment all of this out or just delete it if you're not using it. But we're really only going to be streaming to 4443. If you do leave this on, it will create a separate stream, which will take resources, and I just recommend removing the thing entirely just to save yourself some resources. Now, from here, if you continue to try to reload and test your configuration, you might notice that you're getting this error, that HTTP2 is deprecated. Well, what's really happening here is that right here in the port 4443, which includes those some of those lines that you were seeing, such as the line 37 or 443. So it doesn't really like to use HTTP2 here because we're using HTTPS, and this is actually the older version. So we're actually just going to go ahead and just remove all of those. Okay, and so now we have a completed configuration file, and so I'm going to go ahead and save that file back here. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is actually get our certificate. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go back into our console, and I'm going to go ahead and run that command. Now ideally when this is finished, you're going to get these files, which if you go back into your file system and refresh down here, you should get a new folder that says .acme.sh, and it's going to have all these files here. Now you might want to come back to this later, but that's what you're going to check for here. If this didn't run through successfully, then there's probably something wrong with the Acme server, so you can try a different CA and look up guides on how to certify with those. But we're going to stick with this just for the sake of the tutorial here. The next thing we're going to do is run this command. This section here is just for testing purposes. Okay, so this is a command that you might be using in the future if you need to reset or do something to change nginx if it goes wrong at some point when you're testing the stream. So you can repeat that command. So you're going to go ahead and go here and paste it. And just something to show you is any commands that we did use before, you can use your up and down arrow keys to look through those. Generally, Ubuntu will save those commands for you. Once we've stopped nginx, we are now going to attempt to issue the certificate. Now, you do need to change this right here to the domain and URL that you are using already try not to use that one. Okay, so you might get an error like this where it just doesn't certify, it just takes too long. And you can keep trying to rerun the command and see if it works for you using the free DNS. But when I used my own DNS with Cloudflare, it went a lot more smoothly. And in that situation, you can use a different method, like adding the challenge to your DNS, which you can't do with a free DNS service like this. But with Cloudflare, you can specify different records in your DNS in order to complete the certification. So you can look up how to do the challenge, but you just need a certain command and you'll paste it the same way here, and it should complete a validation. Run your nginx.t again for the verification. You may notice you might get an error here. So when you go back into your configuration here, just make sure that you are matching the same key that was given to you when you did the certification. So my key, for example, is correct right here, except I do need to change this to the following. So it actually looks like I had it certified with Let's Encrypt. So what I'm going to do is just modify this entire chain here and just put in the following. Okay, so from this point, just make sure that you have set your path here to get the specific key and certificate that you received from your certification. Now, I did end up using CertBot. To certify here instead of the Acme here, and that went a lot smoother. So I'll go ahead and just paste that into the video description to help you set up CertBot, and then it should be able to just set up the automatic renewal as well for you. And then after you have set up the CertBot and you've gotten your certification, just go ahead and paste all these commands here, and then I'll be back with you once that's done. The final command, just make sure that you are using the PHP version that you got when we started. And then once that is done, we will finally have the files needed to load the web page for our new server. And finally, you should be able to access your page, and it should look something like this. And if you ever need to see your actual stream files, you can actually come here now. You could set it to try to hide it so it's not visible to the public, but it's not really that important as far as I'm aware. Now while you're here, as soon as you attempt to stream, you will see a URL which will look something like this. So this will be your M3U8, and whatever you set here, I just set this for fun, but anything that you set for the key in OBS is going to basically appear here, and you'll have to copy this, and then you'll be able to load a player, and it's basically going to show you a stream down here. Now as an example, I've loaded this page, and it will basically show the stream that we're currently watching now. Now in your configurations, just make sure that everything that you have entered looks pretty similar to this. So if you get stuck anywhere, definitely check down here, like for example, the PHP version, and make sure your paths here are correct and the structure is pretty similar. You can also check these and make sure that they are aligned with all the little code blocks. And hopefully if you've done all that, it should still work out and load just fine. Do remember to reload nginx every time you save. Alright, and I guess the last thing I'm going to show you here are my OBS settings that I use for streaming that I found were the best overall. So you're going to come down to settings, and what's really important starts right here in stream. You're going to want to be using under service the custom option, and under your destination you're going to set RTMP : and then you're going to put in the name of your domain, and you're going to put another colon right at the end of it with the 1935 protocol number /show. And then right here where it says stream key, it doesn't really matter what you put here. It's just going to define the name of the stream that you'll see when you load up the web page for your website. And then you're going to just copy that entire link it gives you with the .m3u8. The next thing you're going to look at is under the Output tab. This is basically what I prefer to use. Now, it depends on what kind of hardware you're using. If you are using something like a NVIDIA graphics card, you might have an option that says NVENC or NVENC H264. It's a pretty good option. So personally, I found that NVENC is pretty quick, and so I prefer to use it. You can use the CPU option. It'll put a lot more stress on your system, and you might get some drop frames depending on the strength of your CPU. But whatever you'd like to use, you can just choose that down here. Now under the encoder settings, you'll probably want to set the following. So I recommend setting the rate control to CBR for the constant bit rate, and that's going to help stabilize your fragments for your HLS. And for the bit rate, I would vary it between 3000 and I set it to 4000 just to get a little bit more quality out of it, but you should be just fine even at 3000. Very importantly, you're going to want to set a keyframe. I recommend using the keyframe of 2, and what that will help do is instruct the stream to load at a specific spot whenever you reload, or even just whenever someone loads into the stream, they're going to be in sync. The rest of it is a little bit more optional. I recommend using like a slow, good quality profile. Tuning should be high quality. Multipass, it's going to give you some options here. I really do not recommend using the other options. You will probably get desynced. Single pass seems to be the most effective to get the streaming to work here. Under profile, I recommend just using the high. I don't recommend using either of these settings, as I've noticed that it can cause buffering and delay. But you can experiment and see if that works for you. Now under the max beat frames, it really shouldn't hurt anything, but I do recommend just setting that to 2. As for audio, I recommend just keeping it either to 44.1 or the 48. Personally, I find that 44.1 is probably the best. And that is the nginx HLS RTMP streaming server setup tutorial. Thank you so much for sticking around. Hope you enjoy streaming.